Welcome to Bat Therapy, exploring your favorite comic book characters through the lens of clinical psychology. Be a fly on the wall or a bat in the cave, listening in on a friendship built out of a love for talking Batman, comics, and the everyday struggle to achieve mental health and happiness. We're your hosts, clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown and comic enthusiast and nerd aficionado Keaton Hopkins. This podcast is about providing education and understanding, and it's not a replacement for mental health treatment or support. If you're needing help, go to bat-therapy.com for resources. Bum, 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 bum,
It's
bum.
finally here. Yes.
So, can we talk about how great that new theme is? It's so simple, but it's so
It's so good.
effective. Like, it hits like a wrestling intro. Like, it's not just like, oh, this is gonna set the scene. Like, when you hear it, Matt Reeves' Batman is about to punch someone in the face
I
really hard.
know.
So
It's so good.
if our listeners out there have not picked up on it yet, we are going to be discussing Matt Reeves' The Batman in all of its wonderful dark glory.
Yes. And you're going to learn pretty quickly that Keaton and I absolutely love this movie.
Yeah, I've had it. I feel like I've watched a little bit of it every day since it hit streaming, which is on HBO Max. If you
Yes.
needed
I
to
was
know.
excited for it to be on HBO Max so I could watch it again.
Yeah. So the source material today is going to be pretty simple. Matt Reeves, The Batman, a wonderful 3-hour tale of two orphans.
Yes. So, I think, you and I, Keaton, pretty quickly agreed on what we thought the defining topic for this would be. Because, 3 hours, that's a lot of content for us to talk about. We can't talk about every single thing.
Right.
But the movie, I think, sets the stage literally from its first few seconds to line up with, I think, something very, very appropriate for our podcast, which is essentially, at the beginning, you don't know if you're seeing things through the eyes of the Riddler or the Batman.
Right. I assumed that it was that I thought it was Batman at
Yeah.
the beginning, and then you find out very quickly that it was the Riddler doing like serial killer research, like doing his doing his due
Doing his
diligence
thing.
before
Yep.
striking down his first victim. And you realize very early on that this isn't just a riddle me this goofball Riddler. This guy's filled with rage. Like, he's
Yes.
brutally angry.
Yeah.
Like,
You know who else is brutally angry?
who?
Batman.
Oh yeah.
Batman is brutal. Like, you see him in his first scenes and he's talking about, I can't be everywhere. So essentially I have to make people terrified that I'm behind every corner. And
I
then he
love it.
goes, right? And then he goes in and you just see the anger in the fight scene, all the anger that's billowing out of him to the point where the person he's saving like begs him not to hurt him too.
Right. And it was it was so funny because when I watched it, the way that they shot that part of the movie when like all of these different crimes are being committed and they all at the same time see the bat signal flash up in the sky and
Mm-hmm.
they instantly look to the darkest corner around them like, oh God. Like the one guy, after he robbed the store, he sees the bat signal and he gets so scared that he walks into the road and gets hit by a car, right? They set it up instantly as
Yep.
Gotham City is not a great place to be. And it was so different from some of the other Gotham cities that we have seen, because Tim Burton's Gotham City is just this weird, dark dreamscape, and Joel Schumacher's Gotham is really bright with a lot of black light, and it looks like it could be like Middle Earth if it was like the 23rd century. Like it's just the weirdest looking place. And then Christopher Nolan's Gotham is Chicago. Like every time I see it, I'm like, oh yeah, deep dish pizza. That's great. Like it's Nolan's Gotham is Chicago. This Gotham is darkness, and the
Mm-hmm.
cinematography just did such a beautiful job just setting the scene for all of
Yes.
this, and it put us all on edge because like, okay, actually I want to know which one of these dark corners is he about to come out of,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right?
And so I actually have multiple quotes that I'm probably gonna bring into today because there were such good quotes in this movie. And so actually I think it was the first quote that stood out to me hits what you're talking about. And it's during these scenes you're describing, and he says, "They think I'm hiding in the shadows, but I am the shadows."
Ooh. Like it
Right?
just gives me like some of the lines just give me chills. It's kind of like in
Yeah.
the Lion King's like Mufasa, Mufasa, Mufasa. Like I'm just like, oh my God, he's the shadows. He said it. He said the line, and and like I'm really just like turned into a little kid watching this movie because I had so much fun just absorbing all of.
I was literally, my husband can contest to this or can agree with this. I was literally leaning forward in my seat for a
Yeah,
lot of this movie because I was so drawn into everything. There's just so much interesting stuff in terms of him as a character and his development over the entire movie. But essentially, like, it's so interesting because he very much is vengeance, fear. This is how I can do what I need to do. And yet he's even talking about how it's not really working, but it's what he sees himself as having to work with. This is how I can make any impact.
right. What's one thing they did right off the bat here that was different from a lot of the other Batman movies that we see? We didn't see the Waynes get gunned down at the beginning of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't see it, and I
It's a
think
nice change of pace.
it is. I think people, and I go back and forth with it because I know that like, and people have said this with both the Batman movies and the Spider-Man movies. Like, okay, we get it. Uncle Ben got killed. Okay, we get it. The Waynes got murdered, and
Yep.
so they're tired of
Pearls fell.
right. And
Yeah.
they're tired of seeing it. Now I go back and forth with it because I always think about like, well, what about the new fans that are coming to the series that might haven't geeked out like we have over all of these movies?
If their parents didn't sit them down and have them go through the other movies first, that's not our problem.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. You're absolutely
Bad
right.
parenting.
You're absolutely right. I mean, yeah. And so like I said, I go back and forth with it, but the way that they did it was still amazing because at the beginning of the movie, the family that you see is very much Wayne like. It's a little kid and
It's
he's
true.
like running around a room with like a sword or like just pretending to play with his parents. Like they're this perfectly happy upper class family. Hopefully nothing bad happens, right? But you see it happen, and throughout the movie, that kid that survives, you see Bruce looking at him like, oh wow, I've been there.
Yeah.
That sucks.
Well, and so here's the really interesting thing about, so you and I have talked about this behind the scenes of this we started the podcast, but y'all, we've been talking Batman for many years. So we saw the
Once or
movie.
twice.
Yeah, yeah. We saw the movie. We've been chatting about this for a while. So we've talked a bit about this already, where we start with Batman,
Right.
right? And then we see the development of Bruce Wayne.
Yes.
And this is something that is so interesting here because, yes, there's so many things within this movie that show how he is literally trying to be the shadows. He, even at one point, he tells Gordon, no guns. And Gordon says, you're inhuman. That's your thing.
Yes.
Right? So there's this whole thing about not being human, being something dark and something that goes beyond what can be understood as a person, right? And yet here's this kid who pulls something out of him. He just can't help it. He is drawn toward this kid. And this is so Robert Pattinson is my favorite Batman actor. And it's because he acts through his eyes so well. So here we have this figure who's trying to rid himself of humanity, and you can't fully do that. And it comes out in his eyes, and it's so wonderful to watch.
Said that magnificently. I had not thought about that, but you're right. You're absolutely right. He does say so much with just his eyes. And it was funny because Robert Pattinson, I feel like he knocked it out of the park here, because
Oh, God, yeah.
when I walked out of that movie, my first thought was, no one gets to mention Edward Cullen ever again. Like,
Oh, he'd probably be so happy to hear you
right,
say
no
that.
no one gets to talk about him being in Twilight ever again. Like, that man is Batman, and
Yep.
he brought it. He put 100%
Mm-hmm.
into it. But you make such a good point. Like, he really is just, he wants to just be nothing but pure vengeance and inhuman and just
Mm-hmm.
fighting in the streets. And throughout this movie, what's so interesting is he realizes he has to be human. There has to
Yes.
be another side of it. People need
Yes.
more. And he says it in the movie. It's like,
Yes.
people need more than
Yes.
just my vengeance. They need someone that they can look up to. They need someone
Yeah.
that gives them hope. And
Yes.
it was so great, because I keep looking at it, and it's like, I looked at it almost afterwards as like, what came first, the chicken or the egg scenario? And it's like, okay, in this instance, Batman came first, because
Mm-hmm.
we
Mm-hmm.
opened the movie 2 years in. They skipped all the other stuff,
Yep.
but they're still early enough that you're gonna get some stuff later that you want to see, like a lot of the bat gadgets and some more of the technology that he has. They haven't introduced Lucius Fox yet, like, and so there, that this is still a very early
Mm-hmm.
Batman, but he has established himself. Like, people see him and they know who he is. The signal
Yes.
is already there, because
The police already hate him.
right, right. We've already, because we, like I said, I think people get tired of seeing the same thing over again. We've already seen the Waynes get killed. We've
Yep.
already seen Batman, Bruce Wayne training to become Batman. They don't need to see him doing crunches for 8 hours a day. They don't need, and sword fighting. Like, they don't need to see all that. This opens up and it's like, I'm gonna punch some people till they stop robbing.
Yes.
That's
And
what
you're
I'm
right.
about.
He starts with, I am going to be pure vengeance.
Right.
But that gets put to the test in a number of different ways. Catwoman keeps coming to him this whole movie saying, be vengeance. And she actually asks him to do things that he sets boundaries and backs away from, right?
Right.
So realizing he's not actually pure vengeance. And also, not to mention, okay, I'm going the pure vengeance route. Hi, Riddler.
Right.
So here we
Oh.
have someone who's like, you want to see pure vengeance? Let me show you fear, violence, vengeance. That's all we're going with. And not only that, but I learned it from you. And
Right.
I saw the message you sent out to everyone, and it hit me on a personal note to the point where I see us as a partnership.
Right, right. And so of course now Batman is like, that that's not what I meant.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of meant robbing people is bad, and shooting people is bad. And Riddler, he took it on a whole nother level. He's like, we're gonna kill every corrupt person. And so it's funny because at the beginning of this movie, of course, you see Batman, and he like beats up the people that are about to like take out some poor guy getting off the train, right?
Mm-hmm.
Riddler is going after mayors and district
Yes.
attorneys and commissioners.
Yes. And so here's what's interesting, right? These are very corrupt people.
Hmm.
And they're high ups that usually get out of getting in trouble. And so in the beginning, technically, Riddler's more effective than Batman,
Right.
right?
He has them
In
all.
terms of what Batman's going for.
He definitely has them terrified. right? Like you at
Mm-hmm.
one point when they're all just hanging out in the iceberg lounge, which I mean, and that was another thing that's funny. Like I'll get back on that later. But you see all of Gotham's higher ups just hanging out in Penguin's nightclub,
Yeah.
and the one guy, he's like terrified. He's like, this is scary. What the Riddler's doing? Like he's beating people to death and duct taping their entire head and putting people's heads in rat cages. Like
Mm-hmm.
this is scary stuff. And then it's like, wow, so he's probably going to learn the error of his ways. And then the next time you see him, he has a bomb around his neck, and things don't go well for him. It's
Yes.
an excellent scene at his expense.
Speaking of another example of Batman trying not to be human and it actually working against him, what kind of idiot walks up to a dude with a bomb around his neck and you're not going to have any extra bomb protection?
Like
What is wrong with you?
like I said, this is it's not freshman year Batman, but it is sophomore year Batman where he's like, I know everything. And it's like,
Well, exactly.
but you're a
So he's
sophomore.
he's he's actually tricked himself in some ways, I think, into I am beyond human. I am not human, and it's in some ways actually working against him.
Right. And it's funny because he's walking around and he's all emo and listening to Linkin Park and mad and angry, and Alfred's just over there like, you want me to solve your crossword puzzle for you, Bruce? Like, you seem kind of mad. You want me to just like make you some soup and maybe we can sit down and solve some puzzles together? He's like,
Remember when your parents died and I taught you to fight? This isn't exactly what I had in mind.
right. And Bruce is just over there mad. I'm mad and vengeance and all that. And Alfred's like, yeah, you wanna come sit down and maybe we can solve your puzzle? How about that? Let's.
It was like Scott Snyder's Bruce Wayne like on steroids. Like that anger, but without any of the hiding it.
Right, right. But it wasn't the psychotic anger like Frank Miller's All Star Batman, right? It wasn't. He wasn't.
So what do you mean by that? Because people use psychotic, but usually
Okay.
their meaning's different than what the actual definition is.
Whenever I think of All Star Batman and Robin, the go-to thing that makes me say psychotic is when he literally kidnaps Robin, throws him in the Batcave, and tells him he can eat rats if he's hungry. Right?
Mm,
Like, I don't think this Bruce Wayne was on
yeah.
that
I would
level.
encourage not using terms like psychotic for that since
Really?
it's
Okay.
technically not. Yeah. So psychotic is a certain set of symptoms,
Okay.
but there is like some common vernacular where psychotic, a lot of times people think something really violent that has like an irrational seeming tinge to it, right?
I absolutely use it that way. I did not know that
Yeah.
that was not a, can I say kosher, a kosher term?
Yeah. So a lot of people don't realize that. So when it comes to psychosis, and a lot of times I think we just avoid using psychotic in general because it has become just such a stigmatizing term. But when it comes to psychosis, we're talking about symptoms related to differences in the brain. You tend to have more dopamine, for example, in terms of your neurotransmitters. I'm not going to go into all of the stuff, but essentially, usually you're seeing things like hearing voices or seeing things that other people aren't seeing. A person might have odd or unusual belief systems that get very stuck for them, also known as delusions. A person might have what we call avolition, or just this kind of difficulty with actually getting themselves moving, might have trouble with thought processes. So sometimes we might see things where a person might be meaning to talk to you in a quote unquote normal string of words or sentences, but they end up being kind of all over the place. It's hard for them to stay on topic or stay on point.
Right.
And so these are the things that make up psychosis, but it is very common for people to talk about something being psychotic. And I actually figured it was going to come up today
Yeah.
because of the Riddler.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, that's a good
So the
That's a good
Riddler,
point.
Joker, there are a number of different characters within Batman's world that people are automatically going to describe their behaviors as psychotic.
Oh, they're a psychopath, right? Like that's the go-to.
Yeah. And so psychopath and psychosis are completely different, even though they
Really?
sound very
They do.
similar.
They
Yeah.
sound wow, like they're the words in there. Okay.
I know. So psychopathy is different than psychosis, completely different. And when it comes to the Riddler, there's definitely some potential for psychopathy. And there's also some potential for psychosis as well. So when it comes to psychopathy, what we're talking about is someone who has very little empathy or lacks empathy, has trouble really putting themselves in the shoes of other people or caring about others. There tends to be a manipulative component. So someone who's going to not necessarily see the reason to follow the rules of the world around them. So we'll kind of manipulate and shift things to get where they want to go with things. A lot of times we think of people like serial killers, like the Riddler, or we think of people who have committed a lot of crimes. However, there are also people who function perfectly well from day to day, and, we see them in lots of places. So there's actually plenty of people out there that will say what they got to say to get where they want to get, and they don't kill people. So psychopathy can actually be your next door neighbor, can be, I don't know, your dentist, your lawyer, your social worker, your whoever.
Your friend that you do podcasts with.
Which one of us are you referring to with that?
What? I don't know. I mean, you're the doctor. I took Psych 1000 in college, and let me tell you what I think.
Oh man, I can't tell you the amount of times I'm like, oh, go you.
Right.
But yeah, so I know we got completely off track with that, but I figured this kind of stuff was going to come up because of the Riddler. And yeah, we say things like, oh man, that person was really psychotic, or that was psychotic.
Yeah, I say it all the time.
It's actually, a lot of times those kinds of things can be harmful or hurtful to people because it connects things that actually aren't related to violence to being seen that way, right? So a lot of times in the news, if you hear about psychosis, someone might have schizophrenia, for example. When do we hear about schizophrenia? When someone's schizophrenia is related to some sort of violent situation.
Right.
But most violent situations have nothing to do with schizophrenia.
Right.
Right? And most people with schizophrenia are not violent. And in fact, unfortunately, if you have schizophrenia, you're more likely of actually having violent things perpetrated against you.
Wow.
Yeah. So this whole connection between psychotic and violence can just be really hurtful for people. So I like to kind of point that out because, a lot of people don't know. And there is kind of this psychopathy and psychotic, because they sound so similar, the lines can get blurred. So when it comes to the Riddler, I think he's a good example that can kind of help tease apart. So he's definitely got some stuff going on where he's pure vengeance, right? He's going to do whatever the heck he's got to do to get things done. He doesn't care who gets in his way.
And he does it brilliant.
He does it brilliantly, right? So if you have these things going on with you, it doesn't mean you're unintelligent, right? So he's doing it brilliantly, and he keeps kind of building on top of it. He doesn't really have any boundaries with himself, right? He doesn't have any limits he's unwilling to cross. He literally keeps going to the point where all of a sudden he doesn't care about innocent lives. He's literally drowning 50% of the people in the city, right?
Right.
So that's hitting on potential kind of psychopathy related stuff. He also, I was wondering if he might also be schizotypal personality disorder.
Wait, say that. Can you say that word for me again?
Schizotypal.
Schizotypal.
Yes.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, people haven't heard of that very often. So it's a personality disorder, which is a term I don't love because it makes it sound like you as a person are messed up.
Broken.
So I'm just going to call it schizotypal. But essentially, when it comes to personality disorders, these are These are traits that people have that are persistent, they're long standing for them, so essentially parts of their personality that are inflexible to the point that it causes a lot of problems for them and or the people around them. So schizotypal is actually a lot of people see it as kind of a lesser version of psychosis. So you don't necessarily have seeing things, hearing things. You might not have like intense paranoia or odd beliefs. But what you tend to have is someone who is kind of oddball, sees the world in a different way, tends to have kind of oddities to them. They're disconnected. They tend to be more isolated. They have trouble connecting with people. They might have like odd reactions when you're interacting with them and talking with them. Like the Riddler, for example, he kind of laughs at random times. He also, like he has this sense of connectedness to Batman that isn't actually there, right? So
Yes. He sees Batman almost as like his partner and his brother
yes,
and his hero. Right.
yes. And when he sees Batman reacting in certain ways, he's taking that as information to say, okay, this is confirmation of what I believe. And he's not really taking in things that go against his beliefs. So these kind of oddities to his character strike kind of like schizotypal. So he's got kind of something that is in this realm related to psychosis in some ways, and then he's definitely got this like psychopathy related stuff as well. So you see how there are these kind of different things happening. And once again, he's kind of a nice example to separate those two terms a bit.
And and gosh, looking at it from that perspective, that is another reason why I said this movie is a tale of two orphans, because
Yes.
you have Bruce on one end and you have Edward on the other. Both experienced horrible things happen in their
Yes.
childhood. One had $1 billion.
That helps.
Right. And he even and gosh, Edward even says that in a phenomenal monologue. Paul Dano, I feel like, knocked it out of the park as
So good.
Riddler. And he's like, he even says at one point, like, Bruce Wayne sitting in the middle of the city in a castle, like, that's not being an orphan.
No.
I was an orphan. Like, it's almost like he almost gatekeeps the term. Like, no, you don't get to be an orphan. I'm an orphan. I was addicted to drugs. Rats gnawed at my fingers, and he's angry. And the reason is, you find out later, part of it is Bruce's fault, because the
Mm-hmm.
money that
Yep.
was supposed to help people like him
Mm-hmm.
was being corrupted. It was
Yep.
being used by these corrupt politicians that were taking it and doing other things with it. And so I thought that was brilliant, because this movie was not saying that the world needed Batman. This movie was saying the world needs Bruce Wayne.
Keaton, this is why I knew you were the perfect person for this podcast. Because I know, so like we go into this stuff, and Keaton's like, okay, well you're the doctor here, so it's up, well, I'm following your lead. And I'm like, no, you have a good mind for picking up on these things. You just don't know the psychology terms and the know-how and whatnot. But
You're
I think that's
absolutely
just
right.
such a right. That's such a beautiful description of this, right? And once again, he tried very hard to remove all of his humanity,
Yeah.
right? And so he tried to remove all of his humanity, and that is where most, if not all, of his mistakes lie. And as he realizes this through these things that happen, it draws out Bruce Wayne, which he realizes was the missing component all the time. Too
Right.
bad he didn't listen to Alfred, years ago.
And there's so many parallels between Bruce and Edward, because both of them at some point in the movie experience like a glass shattering moment when their heroes aren't who they thought they were, right?
Yeah.
Because Edward, of course, when Riddler is having this, after his when during his monologue with Batman, he realizes that Batman is not on his side and against him. He's like,
Yes.
no, 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 this isn't how this was supposed to go, and he's super angry. Batman also has a meltdown when he thinks for a little bit that
Mm-hmm.
his parents were corrupt, that his dad actually paid and had someone killed.
Yep.
That wasn't actually what happened, but for a little while
Mm-hmm.
there, you saw his world beginning to
Yeah.
crumble
Mm-hmm.
because he's like, no, this can't be. This is horrible, and the way they react to it was very very different because well, Bruce is very very angry, but he's just like, Alfred, tell me this wasn't true, right? And he sits there and he listens, and Alfred kind of talks him off a ledge. But for a little while, it kind of gives you that glimpse of just how close him and Riddler could be.
Yes.
Because what was going to happen to him if
Mm-hmm.
he had found out that his parents that he held up on a pedestal
Yep.
weren't the best the best people.
And so, I'll give it to Riddler. Okay. All the money. Yeah. Can't ignore that, right? There are definitely some societal things and lack of resources that did not do the Riddler any favors. However, one of the key points that I really think is brought out in this, because it's how do you keep someone from going to pure vengeance and then they just do destruction after destruction after destruction until everything's gone?
Yes.
Connection. Connecting to people, being able to relate, having true relationships, not this kind of sense of a partnership with someone from afar, but that true connection. So with Bruce Wayne, you're talking about how he reacted. That's not the only thing that happened in that moment, right? So that happens. He also almost loses Alfred.
Yes.
And I wrote down the quote because I loved it. I never thought I'd fear like that again. I thought I'd mastered all that. I'm not afraid to die, which he makes very honest from the beginning. He's really not afraid to die. I realize now there's something I haven't gotten past. This fear of ever going through any of that again, losing somebody I care about.
Wow. Yeah. There's just a lot of darkness because of past trauma. And
Yep.
that was a question that I wanted to ask you because we've talked about grief on this podcast before
Mm-hmm.
and how bad it is. But one of the things that happened in this movie that I thought was really, really interesting was when they brought up the fact like, oh, the Waynes might not have been so perfect. And Bruce for a little while thinks that
Mm-hmm.
they were bad people. Like, how do you deal with finding out that someone that you looked up to was not a good person?
Mm.
And not on top of that, in this instance, they're no longer in this world. They were dead.
Yeah.
Like that's a rough. I imagine that has to be a very rough thing to deal with. Like finding out. Like what if someone were to find out like, oh wow, that my grandfather was a secretly a monster and I had no
Mm-hmm.
idea. Like how does someone even begin to deal with
And I
that
think
kind of grief?
that's I think key, something you just said here. He was a monster. I didn't know that. Well, is that person a pure monster if you had a different experience of them? But here's the crux, right? It's so difficult to integrate those different parts of someone because sometimes the dark stuff is so dark. And maybe it's certain things that, depending on where you're at, you might consider unforgivable or difficult to forgive or move past. And it is very hard to be able to see all of these as parts of a person. It's also a lot of times why we as people feel shame. We often feel shame about things because it is hard to integrate into this is something that I'm not sure how to be this part of myself and what I did or how I was with the rest of me and what I want to be and how I want to be able to view myself, right? So it can be very difficult to see a person for the complication that all of us are. And you're absolutely right. When it comes to death, it can make things that much more complicated because you don't have as much ability to work through that and move to a more complete picture of that person because they're gone. You only have memories to work off of. And you can't confront sounds aggressive, but essentially you can't go to that person and tell them how you feel or talk through it with them or really do anything that impacts that person that you've learned about, right? That relationship has been severed. So whether it's death or sometimes there are other things that get in the way. So for example, that person's not in your life. There's no way for you to communicate with them. Or maybe it's someone that every time you try and communicate with them, it's not a healthy thing. You've had to separate yourself. These are all cases where you're right. It can be very difficult to be able to integrate such extreme negative information about people into who we see them as. It's very hard for us as people to see monstrous sides of ourselves and still see someone as human.
One of the words that you brought up just was the next thing that I actually want to talk about. You mentioned shame.
Yeah.
A lot of this movie and the things that occurred were because of people and their shame and the stigma behind mental health. So in this incarnation, because normally Martha's maiden name and the family she comes from is the Kane family.
Yes.
In this instance, she was an Arkham.
Yes.
And the mom had a lot of issues and ended up killing her husband and then committing suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that, Bruce's mother, Martha, was in and out of mental institutions
mm-hmm.
throughout her life.
Yes.
And Thomas Wayne was trying his best to cover all of that up and to spare Martha the shame of the name Arkham.
Yeah.
I guess. And so that's a pretty big part of the story, because there's a reporter that apparently probably worked for Sal Maroney that was trying to out this, because at the time Thomas was trying to run for governor or mayor. I think he was trying to run for mayor, and he wants Carmine to kind of scare this reporter off, and Carmine's like, I can scare him off and kill some, right? And,
yep.
and so that sets up a pretty big part of this, and so and it made me think of it when you mentioned the word shame.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's such a huge stigma when it comes to mental health.
Absolutely.
People, if someone says, oh, they have mental health struggles, I think we should be looking at it the same way as we see someone with a broken arm. But I don't feel like that's what happens in the world. Whenever mental health is always something that's sometimes laughed at, sometimes people are afraid of it, to the point that so many times people are afraid to express their emotions or even share that they struggle when it comes to mental health because of the stigma surrounding it.
Absolutely. And I love that you point this out as a key part of the plot, because as much as I love this movie, they could have trimmed a little fat. So it's 3 hours,
Right.
and this is a very important part of the plot, but I think that you could lose sight of it. Like when I left and I was thinking back to the movie, I didn't really remember that part. And then when it came up the second time I watched it, I was like, oh yeah. And yes, I found this so interesting for a few different reasons. You're absolutely right. There is a lot of shame. There's a lot of stigma around mental health, and absolutely for what you're talking about, because people are actually discriminated against due to differences in their mental health experiences. And some people see it as a mental health symptom or diagnosis. Other people don't see it as that. There's also great arguments in terms of some of these things have to do with just the fit of the world and how the structure of everything is set up, and how well does someone acclimate to that or not. But absolutely, there's tons of stigma out there. People that have mental health lived experience, they go through life having to decide, who do I talk to about this? How do I talk about it? When do I talk about it? and have to be mindful that it can impact them.
Right.
So I know a number of mental health providers that have mental health conditions, and guess what? You can be in the middle of a group of mental health providers and still get discriminated against based on your condition.
And
So
yeah,
yeah,
that brings up a very good point. Yeah, because I have like so many friends that several friends that are therapists, and all of them have therapists,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Tons of therapists have therapists.
Right? And so
Absolutely.
it's funny because normally you look at people that don't struggle from mental health as having it all together, when in reality what it is I think everyone has some mental health struggles, but there's the people that deal with it and the people that don't.
Mm, yeah. And some people have really lucked out in the genetic lottery, lucked out in the uh, childhood environment lottery. Like there are things that add stress and strain or remove our ability to learn how to innately heal ourselves or innately manage and cope with what goes on with our mental health.
Right.
Right. And so there's this variability, and some of it is just pure luck, kind of like Bruce Wayne having a bunch of money and having Alfred versus the Riddler, who did not, per him,
Oh
it sounds like
wow.
didn't have anyone.
Right. Wow. Yeah, because and this is what's so different. This Riddler was a true victim of a failed system. No one was there for him. He grew up, he suffered throughout and
Yes.
no one was there for him. And so he saw his enemy as the system that completely failed him, which is
Yes.
why he was taking out all these corrupt politicians. He was taking
Mm-hmm.
out all these corrupt government people. He wanted to take out Bruce Wayne
Mm-hmm.
because he's like, this is all like, this is your fault. This is this is this is your fault. This is the rich people's fault, and I'm gonna press reset to the whole system. And there's a small part of you that almost wants to root for him a little bit
Mm-hmm.
until you realize the damage that he's gonna do to innocent people, right?
Yes. And think about that. And once again, this is where connection that can build empathy and remind us of what goes on outside of ourselves is so important, because he actually turns into what he hates,
Hmm.
right? He turns into someone who takes out the innocent,
Right.
which is literally where it started.
Right.
Yeah. Getting back to what you were talking about with the shame and mental health and everything. I did want to note something else about this, which is that I found it an interesting storyline as well, because I feel like it kind of gave you a little bit more feel of where Bruce Wayne got certain things from too. So you see that his mother has these mental health difficulties, that she struggles. She also had just intense, unbelievable trauma,
Right.
right? And struggled to manage that to the point where she was in and out of institutions, which is totally okay.
Right.
People sometimes need that higher level of help at times,
Right.
but at the same time can be very stigmatizing.
Right.
And so we get the sense that genetically, and potentially also, we don't know kind of where she was at once he was born. It sounds like she was probably doing better, because it doesn't seem like he was aware of what had gone on before. But it seems like there's this genetic potential for
Right.
some mental health struggles when it comes to trauma. And then we also see the father side, right? So Thomas Wayne, here's where we see the fight and the loyalty and the lengths that a Wayne might go to protect those that they see needing their protection.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
I saw it as giving a picture of an interesting, here's what combines together to equal out a person who, when this trauma happens, they develop into Batman, right? And then they develop into this, I'm going to focus on this vengeance, da 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 da. And then, of course, we see him, you know, being able to reach into himself, find Bruce Wayne again.
That's a very good point. And this entire movie is about Batman finding Bruce Wayne again.
Which is so cool.
It was different because so many superhero movies, it's like the normal average person becoming they were the hero that they were meant to be. But this movie does it different because in this movie it opens up, it's like the world has Batman. And it did a really good job of kind of paralleling where we're at in the world today. Because, yes, we have people that will physically fight battles. We have people that will physically just get in the ring and go to bat. But at the end of the day, the hero that people actually need is more on the financial and infrastructure side.
Yep.
Right?
And in the daylight, where everyone can see you. Did you notice that at the end?
Oh, yeah.
The bat signal in the daytime?
Oh, yeah. And him actually, and Batman, it's so crazy. Like, there was the scene, it was so great because, and this is how I visualize this. It's so beautiful. At the end, the power is out in the stadium. It's dark. Nobody can see in the Coliseum. It's just super dark. It's pitch black. But I thought about this. Batman could see. Batman could see, but I feel like he realized that everyone else couldn't. That's when he lit the flare. He could see through the darkness just fine, but he realized that he needed to be the light for people.
Yeah.
And it was so cool because they bring back the kid whose father was running for mayor that died at the beginning. You see that kid again, and he makes eye contact with Batman, and it's just like this big fulfilling moment where it's like that kid just got hope back.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's the other piece that's so necessary. So vengeance, it's coming from the right place. He's trying to right the system, defend people, protect, find a way through the corruption. It's not enough. Connection, right? Connection to keep us from going too far and to really try and relate. And then hope, right? We have to see potential for a better future or we're going to burn it all down.
Right. And I think that's one of the things that makes Batman such a cool character to look at, because even though there's this super dark world, obviously the reason he is doing this is because he has hope.
Yeah.
Obviously the reason he's doing this, like other heroes, like, yeah, they do the things they do because they want to help people and truth, justice, and the American way, and you have all of these different methods. But what makes Batman so interesting is so many times when you see him in Gotham, it is in what you would describe almost as a hopeless place. The government's corrupt, Arkham is corrupt, Blackgate is corrupt, everything is corrupt, and he's still fighting the good fight. And the only thing that can keep someone constantly fighting that good fight is because somewhere deep down there's hope.
Yes.
Right.
So, you ready for a mindful nerd moment?
Yes.
All right. So, I was trying to figure out what to do with this. I was like, all right, so what kind of mindful moment can we do? And I just couldn't get around Batman's like ultimate MO in this movie, which is essentially, I want us to do mindful slow walking in the rain and shadows. So, you know, when the bum, 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 right? Like he's in the shadows, he's moving in his combat boots, he's fully geared up in his bat suit. and he's moving through those shadows, right? So just taking on that persona for a few minutes, really taking in that scene, not the future fights and blah blah blah, but just the slow walk in the rain and shadows. What do you think?
Twist my arm.
Y'all can't see it, but Keaton has the biggest grin on his face.
Yeah,
He loves pretending to be Batman.
I do.
It's great.
I do.
I do too. I love pretending to be Batman as well. So, just a friendly reminder. I know we've done a few of these, but just a reminder that your mind is going to wander because you're a human being. You're going to think about something that happened earlier today or last week. You're going to think about something coming up. You're going to get distracted by something else. That's totally fine. It's expected. Just gently acknowledge that your mind wandered and bring yourself back to the exercise. Okay. So once again, just a reminder, we're putting ourselves into the literal combat boots of the Batman. So of Batman, when he's in these shadows of Gotham, he's slowly walking around, surveying things while there's, of course, a light rain because it seems to always be raining for him in Gotham. So first, I'd like you to, if you're comfortable with it, close your eyes or soften your gaze so you're not looking at anything in particular. This is just to help you really imagine yourself in the combat boots of Batman. And I'd like for you to just imagine what Gotham looks like around you, just to kind of put yourself in that mental space. And set your intention to imagine walking mindfully. Take a few deep breaths and just acknowledge that during this imagined walk, you will try to be aware of the environment you imagine around you and also your internal state, your thoughts, your feelings, and any sensations you feel in your body. And we're going to try to make sure that you take in the whole experience, not labeling anything as good or bad. It just is. So as you begin your walk, first notice the sensation of your feet hitting the ground to help get you focused and centered. Notice where you are stepping, the quality of each step, the intensity of your motions, and the feel of the ground beneath your combat boots. Notice the process of moving your legs. What muscles tense or relax as you move? How does your batsuit feel against your skin as you walk? Notice the rhythm of your breath and how it moves in, travels through your lungs and your body, and then leaves again as you exhale. Now expand your awareness to notice the surroundings you imagine around you. As you walk, notice what you see, what you smell, what you hear, what you taste, and what you feel. How does the air feel on your skin? Notice the sensations you feel with the rain. Pay attention to what you notice in the dark shadows of your surroundings. Let's take a quiet moment to notice all the sensations you experience. Not seeing anything as good or bad, it just is. Try to remain aware of the sensation of walking and the environment you envision around you, while you also become aware of your internal experiences. what thoughts cross your mind as you walk? What emotions are there right now? Are they intense or are they mild? Are these internal experiences pulling you in, or can you observe them with a little bit of distance? No need to judge these thoughts and feelings as good or bad. Practice just noticing them for what they are. So we're coming to the end of our walk. Imagine that you're coming up to the edge of the shadows where you're walking in Gotham. And as you walk toward the nearby lights, congratulate yourself for your intention to practice your mindful walking. No matter how many times your mind was pulled away or how well you think the practice went, just notice that the intention to be mindful is the key, and pat yourself on the back. And when you're ready, we will come back to the podcast for Keaton's reaction to the Mindful Nerd moment today.
I think there was something about it. I think rain makes everything a little more peaceful. And I think it varies. It varies from person to person, but there's something about like even just walking in the rain. But it has to be perfect. Like rain on a warm day. Rain during the winter is just like I get nothing.
I heard some labeling going on. What a perfect example. So it's so I wholeheartedly agree with you. I absolutely love mindful anything with rain. There's just something about it. It's refreshing. It gives this relaxed, peaceful feeling a lot of times. But you're right. It could be sleeting on you and it's going sideways and it's swooshing around. And I think that's a really great example of one of the most difficult parts of mindfulness, which is how do we try and refrain from labeling things and pushing or pulling the experience away or toward us based on if we like it or not, right? So let's say it's a peaceful rain. That's easier for us to allow to be. Versus what if someone else listening, their Batman happened to be in quite the whirlwind of rain, and as they imagined it, they're like, oh man, it's like pelting me in the face. Ugh. Right? That wanting to kind of move away from it, that's a judgment. And mindfulness is about how do we just allow things to be what they are? And sure, I mean, like, let's say things are flooding and for safety, you have to move, right? Move. Mindfulness isn't about ignoring things that need change. But in everyday experiences, there's always going to be things we like and we don't like. And if we find a way to not fight the little things, life gets a lot easier.
That's a very, very good point. That's a very good point. I really enjoyed that. I tell you, I think we're gonna have to circle back around to this movie because even though we spent a good amount of time, I'm thinking back. There's so much that we didn't even get a chance to touch on.
We didn't talk about Gordon.
We didn't talk about Gordon. We didn't talk about Selena. We didn't talk about
oh no, Keaton.
Carmine.
It's not a tale of two orphans.
Oh my goodness, it's a tale
of three orphans.
Oh my goodness. Huh.
We're going to have to come back to this at some point.
You're right. Thanks for nerding out with us.
I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown. You can find me at Crafting the Mind on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
And I'm comic enthusiast and nerd aficionado Keaton Hopkins. You can find me and my friends' movie reviews and reaction videos at teamjvs.com or on YouTube at teamjvs. For more information on this and other topics, check out our website at bat-therapy.com. To keep current on episodes and other updates, subscribe to our Bat Therapy YouTube channel or follow us on social media. We'll see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.